How are Sunkist, the depletion of 17-year-old Jamaican rum, crab Rangoons, and Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II connected? The answer? A joint reception between Prince Philip and General Patton after the invasion of Normandy in 1944. Actually, none of that is true at all, but I do know a bunch of other true stuff, so let's find out tonight while together we enjoy Drinking Through History. Good evening, fellow History Tipplers. I'm your host, Leif Halverson, and welcome to tonight's episode. If you've got a beverage that you wish to enjoy during the history lesson, please feel free to do so. Tonight, I'm drinking a homemade shandy that I'm not going to share with you because I'll get a lot of guff about it, but feel free to drink whatever you're interested in tonight. I would suggest that you do have something ready on hand to cleanse your palate once we get to the drink-making section of the program, perhaps a glass of water on standby, so that your taste buds can better enjoy the drink that we'll be building later in the episode. So to answer our question, which will eventually lead us to tonight's drink, we obviously are going to have to look to history. Now, in episode 1, we went back to the year 1836, and while Prince Philip and General Patton most definitely did not have a reception after the invasion of Normandy, the year 1944 does play a major role for tonight's history. And while our four things that we're connecting tonight may seem rather diverse, just stick with me. We're going to bridge it all together beautifully.
It's a mother beautiful bridge. And it's gonna be there.
The year was 1934. Victor Jules Bergeron had just borrowed $800 from his aunt and built a 22 by 26 foot restaurant across the street from his parents' grocery store in Oakland, California. Doesn't sound really that big, does it? In fact, it wasn't. If he was lucky, he might be able to cram in 30 different patrons at a time. And to keep the place warm and to cook the meals that he was providing in this restaurant as well, he had this pot-bellied stove. And while this doesn't seem like all that much, Victor knew how to entertain people. And as the son of French parents who loved to hunt and cook, it should come as no surprise that his restaurant took on the vibe of a hunting shack with mounts of deer and snowshoes hanging on the walls. You know, if only we in the big sky state of Montana had any idea of what that might be like. But it sounds like my idea of a place I'd like to visit on a frequent basis. In fact, a lot of other people felt the exact same way about Mr. Bergeron's place, a place that he called Hinky Dinks. Don't ask me. I'm like one of the worst guys you could ask about restaurant names. Personally, I like eating at a place in Bismarck called Space Aliens, so anyway, don't let the name Hinky Dinks deter you. History actually remembers both Hinky Dinks as well as Mr. Bergeron by a different name. And yes, you're going to have to wait. So Mr. Bergeron's restaurant was doing quite well. The food was cheap, the people liked the atmosphere, and while he did provide the usual standard drinks available that you find in most places, he came up with a few drinks on his own, one of which was called the Banana Cow. Nope, not tonight's drink, but as a bonus feature for the episode. So if you make this drink later on, be sure to comment on our Facebook group. Let us know what you thought. I personally can't make it because though I like bananas, bananas don't like me. So it's not going to be one that I personally am going to be able to drink and enjoy. But let us know what you think of it. It'd be good to hear from you. Now, this drink was pretty popular, and that caught Mr. Bergeron's attention. It got him wondering if maybe there was a market for more of these unexpected, special, mixed, exotic type drinks, which led to he and his wife doing some traveling around the United States and even down to the Caribbean. Now, in their travels, he's trying a number of foods, mixed drinks, and he's asking the local barkeeps all kinds of questions. Now, if you'll remember back to episode 1, we talked about how barkeeps in one place would go and visit someplace else. They'd get introduced to something new that they like. They come on back to where they've got shops set up, and they replicate it, and they share it with the patrons that are there. Now, despite his travels in the pursuit of things to showcase at Hinky Dinks, the reality was, it wasn't the far-off places that he visited in his quest that provided an overwhelming inspiration. Surprisingly, that would come from someplace not so far away from him in Oakland. It was a trip in 1937 to Hollywood, California, that would change absolutely everything. Now, in the 1920s and 30s, there were a number of these different island, and sometimes they were called hurricane themed restaurants and nightclubs. The top end ones would oftentimes have a swing band that you could go dancing. You could listen to the music while you and your special someone wore a nice dress and jacket and tie.
you imagine Freckleface having sisters as cute as that?
It's incredible.
Think of that entire chunk that takes place at Novello's between Danny Kaye, Bing Crosby, Vera Ellen, and Rosemary Clooney in that wonderful Christmas movie, White Christmas. It's a tropical themed place. It's a nice escape from your everyday life. Perhaps some exotic to you food and some cocktails that were pretty much the same as you could get every other place. It's not one of these joints that Mr. Bergeron happens to step into. What he does step into is one of the opening scenes of today, what we know as Tiki, and Don the Beachcomber was the best place to get introduced to it. Now, do your best to try to imagine not having seen many images of what people might call a tropical island paradise, and not even entirely knowing what that concept was supposed to be either. It's tough for us to do today because we've got literally all that information at our fingertips now, thanks to the internet, images of people on trips and research and all that kinds of things that we've got available to us readily today. But in the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s, that just wasn't the case. They just didn't have that information available to them. They maybe saw a postcard of some exotic place, maybe from Polynesia. But for the most part, that was pretty much it for most folks. So you walk into this Tiki nightclub, and keep in mind, they're not necessarily calling it Tiki yet, but that's what we call it today. Walk into this Tiki nightclub, push open a set of rattan doors, and see tarred codline fishing nets hanging on the wall. Old glass floats and buoys hanging from the ceiling. Polynesian face masks, perhaps, and other such items. Lots of palm tree fronds. Rattan-laced chairs, cast-off items found on the beach after the tide goes out. These little lamps with woven shades on them in the dining tables. Later on, you might actually see tiki carving figures. And for the first time, tropical cocktails. Not your standard ones that you can get any old place. For the first time now, exotic cocktails. Many of them featuring rum that seem like they should really be from some tropical island in the South Pacific. This is exactly what Mr. Bergeron walked into when he went to Don the Beachcomber. And it blew his mind. He was enamored by absolutely everything he saw and asked the bartenders loads of questions about all the foods and all the drinks until it was finally time for him to go. And actually, he went outside and he stayed out there hoping that he would get a chance to go back inside, as is told by barkeepers from the time that was working at Don the Beachcombers. When Mr. Bergeron went and visited Don the Beachcombers. He just waited outside, waiting to go back in. He's so enamored by all of this that's taking place in front of him. He was thoroughly convinced that whatever this exotic and tropical was that he just witnessed, this was the way to go. This was the change that he needed to make. So Mr. Bergeron talks to his wife. She agrees, and they change absolutely everything. Everything gets stripped down, so it's no longer looking like a hunting shack. They're pulling down all of the animal mounts that are on the walls, the snowshoes, other hunting paraphernalia. Maybe they had traps. I don't know. What we do know is that it looked like a hunting shack on the inside. So all of that gets stripped down, and in its place, he's putting up all kinds of these fishing nets, and float lamps end up going up. He buys items from friends, and even Don Beach, owner of Don the Beachcomber himself. And in fact, if you happen to have something that perhaps was from the South Seas, or looked like it was from the South Seas, maybe it was something that could be strewed from being Polynesia that he could adorn his restaurant with, Mr. Bergeron would be willing to trade to you his food and beverage in exchange for these items that you happen to have. Now, this plays a role in what becomes Mr. Bergeron's new moniker. One day, his joint is called Hinky Dicks. The next day, it was named something else, and it was a hit. Now, understandably for most folks who are looking back on this in history, this might not make sense as to why this phenomenon of tiki that's being created by Don Beach at Don Beachcombers and now Mr. Bergeron was such the hit that it was. That's partially because you're probably looking at it through our 21st century lenses, right? So if we look at this through the lens of history, which is funny because I'm wearing historic glasses right now, it'll probably make more sense, okay? In light of recent events that you and I, we've all been dealing with, you might even end up answering the beckoning call of tiki as it was then as well, like they did. Both Don Beach, whose original name, he actually legally changed his name, was Ernest Gant, and Mr. Bergeron, they both built their establishments in the 1930s. So we need to take a look at what was taking place during that rough time frame that they were opening and running their establishments. Okay, well, the Great Depression, it kicks off in 1929 and arguably lasts to the beginning years of World War II. And by the way, this woman that you're seeing is from that time frame. Her name was Florence Thomas, and at the time that this image taken, she was 32 years old. Prohibition was around for 13 years, running from 1920 to 1933. The Dust Bowl begins in 1930 and runs the better part of a decade. Life was tedious. It was rough. It was hard. It was exhausting. And many folks were unemployed. And to enjoy a drink at your favorite watering hole was now illegal. And on top of dealing with the black blizzard, it sapped a lot of whatever remaining energy most folks had left at the time. No matter how hard you tried, in America at that time, it sure could seem like it was kicking you in the teeth.
It's from a finance company.
So it is from the finance company. So it's better than no letter at all. So they want the third payment on the Plymouth. So they want the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh. So they want the Plymouth.
Throw all of that into the mix, and it just simply didn't matter if the story of Tiki was real to people or not. While it wasn't possible for most people to go and visit someplace like Polynesia, or whatever the heck Polynesia was supposed to be, you could spend a couple of hours at a tiki joint with fake Americanized Chinese food that was relatively affordable, with flavors, as far as you knew, anyway, were coming from the South Pacific. Drinks that tasted like they were probably from some tropical place. At the least, it was exotic, whether they actually were or not. And be surrounded by this atmosphere that sure seemed like it was Polynesia or something from the South Pacific, whether it was actually real or not. You see, this tropical tiki thing wasn't, as some folks today who insist on looking at everything through modern lenses would say, it wasn't some kind of Polynesian cultural appropriation. Okay, tiki was very much for many Americans about escapism. Whether the tiki that they experienced was real or not didn't matter, but feeling like you were possibly a world away, far away from the troubles and reality of life, was. And Don Beach and Victor Bergeron could do that for you with things that have survived and lasted till today. For example, do you like crab rangoons? They're not Asian cuisine, despite the fact that you can get them at so many different American Chinese restaurants. Even here in my hometown of Sydney, there are 2 different places that we can go get crab rangoons that are Asian restaurants. A third place that's not an Asian restaurant, but sells crab rangoons as well. If you enjoy these tasty appetizers as much as I do, you can thank Victor Bergeron for coming up with crab rangoons to sell in his restaurants. And they've lasted until today. Now, Mr. Bergeron's establishments, he opened quite a few of them over the passage of time, were phenomenally successful. If he was there that night, he could regale to you the story of where he was born, someplace in the South Seas that he actually wouldn't visit until later on in life. He could enthrall you with a tale about how he had lost his leg to a shark attack, and he'd take a knife and he'd stick it in the leg and just catch you off guard. You'd just be wowed in the stories that he's telling you. But again, the stories didn't have to be real. The reality was Mr. Bergeron had lost his leg to amputation in 1908 to stop the spread of tuberculosis, or TB, that he contracted when he was a sickly child. But you'd never guess it by the way he made you feel. And he was very good at that. By the 1960s, he would have 25 locations around the world. Later on, almost 80% of which, by the way, were in the United States alone. Today, Mr. Bergeron, who would trade you his exotic food and drink for your South Pacific items to adorn his walls, is known as Trader Vic, which is what Hinky Dinks was renamed after they went from the hunting shack vibe to tiki. Now today, while only 2 of the 19 remaining Trader Vic's locations are in the United States, it is the only surviving original tiki company still in existence today. It's been phenomenally successful, from original cocktails to fine dinings, and they've earned a lot of awards over the years, frequented by a number of people of note as well. In fact, in 1983, Queen Elizabeth II would actually enjoy for the first time ever a meal that was not prepared by a palace chef at the San Francisco location of Trader Vic's, which to me is just pretty doggone cool. And I'm sure Her Majesty probably, she could do with a bit of escape every now and again, too, with all the things that she was having to deal with. And that's how everything's connected, minus Sunkist, but we're going to get on into that when we go to build the cocktail here in a little bit. Trader Vic's is what bridges it all together.
It's a mother beautiful bridge.
So let's cleanse those palates, get our mixology gear ready in front of us, and in the memory of Trader Vic, let's build ourselves a drink. Now, after Vic entered the world of tiki, he didn't just settle for the banana cow as his final exotic drink. Inspired like so many of the barkeeps before him, and inspired a whole bunch by Don Beach. By the way, he emulated a bunch of his things, and he was completely open about it and had things on his menu listed in Trader of Don the Beachcomber, by the way. He continues to futz with all of his drinks. So in 1944, remember, we talked about that before. In 1944, he developed what is most likely his most famous and most top-selling drink, called the Mai Tai. No, not whatever the heck that Mai Tai is. It was this Mai Tai. It was on this particular day he was entertaining two friends from Tahiti, and on the spot he comes up with this drink. So he grabs off the shelf this 17-year-old bottle of J. Ray and Nephew Jamaican rum, combines it with orange curacao, rock candy syrup, orgeat, and lime juice. And when he presented it to his friends, one took a sip and exclaimed in Tahitian, "Mai Tai Roai," which means out of this world, the best. So the name Mai Tai stuck, and that particular tiki drink was born. The Mai Tai was so popular that it essentially wiped out the stock of available 17-year-old J. Ray and Nephew Jamaican rum. So Vic starts using the 15-year-old, which is still pretty good as a substitute for the 17-year-old one. But after that, the supplies of that were becoming hard to come by. So he was having his own blending of rums made specifically for Trader Vic's to be used in its place, and sometimes he'd end up using two different rums mixed in with the Mai Tai to try to emulate that original 17-year-old rum. Now, in 1972, it was estimated that they were selling several thousand Mai Tais daily in just Honolulu alone, not to mention an even greater number daily in what was then 20 Trader Vic's restaurants throughout the world. It was that popular. It was responsible for the depletion of 17-year-old rum. That's just crazy. So the recipe for the famed Mai Tai comes from Vic's very own bartender's guide and reads as thus. Mai Tai, 1 lime, half-ounce orange curacao, quarter-ounce rock candy syrup, quarter-ounce orgeat syrup, 2-ounce Trader Vic Mai Tai rum or 1-ounce dark Jamaican rum, and 1-ounce Martinique rum. That's a thing of debate we're not going to get into on this episode. Cut lime in half, squeeze juice over shaved ice in a Mai Tai or double old-fashioned glass. Save 1 spent shell, because we're going to use that for garnish. Add remaining ingredients and enough shaved ice to fill the glass. Hand shake. Decorate with spent lime shell, fresh mint, and fruit stick. Now, when Vic first makes this in 1944, he only used the lime shell and mint as a garnish. To look like an island with a tree sticking out on top of it, which is kind of a neat way of doing that. So that's the way that we're going to garnish ours tonight. Although if you order a Mai Tai at either of the 2 surviving Trader Vic's locations here in the U.S., you'll also get the fruit stick, and that's fine because it's Trader Vic's and they can do that. So we've got all of our items assembled. As far as the liquids, we've got the orange curacao. A lot of folks will use a dry curacao today. That might be actually more in line with what Vic was building his with. We've got the rock candy syrup. This is that 2-to-1 white sugar to water ratio. We've got our orgeat, which is the almond syrup. The rum that I'm going to be using, which isn't still quite what it should be, as far as what Vic was using, but this is what I've got available to me. It's in the vein of the direction we should be going. We've got the Appleton Estate signature blend, and this is like a 4 or 5 year aged rum. You can get this a lot of places. They've rebranded the way it looks though. So the new one is a little bit taller bottle, and it just says Appleton Estate signature on it. We've also got our limes, and the size of these limes is going to come into play, and I'll explain some about that. And then for our garnish at the end, we've got our sprig of mint ready to go, and I'll explain what we're doing with that. So right off the bat, Vic tells us in his Mai Tai recipe that we use 1 lime, right? Now the problem is, are we talking 1 lime, or are we talking 1 lime? So what we are going to do tonight, we are going to use 3/4 of an ounce of a lime tonight. Now, we still haven't covered Sunkist. The limes is not where it comes in. It actually comes in with the juicer. It's not one of these. It was actually the one that Vic used and was very popular at the time was a Sunkist juicer, which looks like this. As you can see, a piece would be cut in half, slid on top, and you would squeeze it sideways like a pair of pliers, and the juice would come out the bottom. So that's how Sunkist ties in. We've now got all 4 points tied together. So let's get this measured out here now. We're going to start with what we're choosing to be 3/4 of an ounce. Depending on the strength or the type of rum you're using, you could use 1 ounce. We are going to go with 3/4 of an ounce tonight. Now, if you are not using something like the Appleton Estate, all right, if you're using a Bacardi Gold, which I said you can make it work, you are going to want to pull this down to a 1/2 ounce of lime juice, because otherwise that rum is going to be buried, and you really want some of that rum coming through. Otherwise, you're just going to taste lime. So we're going to go with our 3/4 of an ounce, and we're going to probably find out that I'm going to have to cut into this other lime as well too. Now, we want to save one of these lime shells for part of the garnish, because that's what Vic did. That's what we're going to do tonight. We'll just stick them both off to the side. That way we've got our choice. All right, 3/4 of an ounce, and I'm going to go ahead and put that into my shaker. Now, Vic, after he invents the Mai Tai, he's actually using a drink mixer. Think a milkshake mixer as they're making these. Remember, we talked about how many of these a day they're selling alone in Honolulu. They're going through these very quick. It hits them quick. It doesn't completely obliterate everything, and you end up having a good mix. But this is going to work fine for what we're doing. So we've got our 3/4 of an ounce of lime. Now we're going to do our 1/2 ounce of orange curacao. We've got our 1/2 ounce. Then we move on to our 1/4 ounce of rock candy syrup. If you made rock candy syrup, at this point you've probably noticed a little bit. It's a little bit on the thicker side. It goes a little bit slower. That's all right. And it's all right if your 1/2 ounce of orange curacao is a fat 1/2 ounce, and your 1/4 ounce of rock candy syrup is a fat 1/4 ounce. Then we go to our orgeat. And a lot of times this will begin to separate out some. You just heard me shaking the bottle. We want to make sure that it's all mixed around. You should know that what I am making right now, this is going to be about it's either the 26th or the 27th Mai Tai that I've been working on over the past couple of weeks for you to find out how it's going to work. This model that we're making right here is more of our, close to our historic as possible that most folks are going to be able to do type of a thing, along with the, hey man, I like history, I like doing stuff, and this is what I was able to get. So with the list that I've got on our Facebook group, either way, whether you're doing this version or the one with instead of using the orgeat syrup, you're using the, say, the Tirani almond syrup, orgeat syrup, you're still going to have a nice tasting cocktail. That's why I spent all this time doing that. So either way, you're going to have something good to drink. So we've got our orgeat taken care of. Now we're down to our 2 ounces of rum. And again, I'm using the Appleton Estate Signature Blend. I believe they've got a 8-year as well. That would be even better than this. So we're going to put in 2 ounces. Here's 1. Here's 2. And you notice we're doing this at the end because the stickier things will come out a little bit easier out of the jigger once you run whatever your spirit is. So that's why we do it that way. Martin Kate, who has Smuggler's Cove, he recommends doing it in that order as well. So we've got all of our ingredients in. Now it's time to shake. I've got 12 ounces of ice that I've kind of pre-shook just to break everything down. Vic is using shaved ice or cracked ice. Now I'm going to hand mix it here. So the entire kit and caboodle is going to end up going in there. Remember, you can use a double old fashioned or double rocks glass. I'm a nerd, so I'm actually using a Trader Vic's Mai Tai glass. So in our Mai Tai goes. And again, ideally this would be already cracked down broken ice, or you're going to be using shaved ice, which a lot of us just don't have access to, and that's all right. Now to garnish, he wants us to use one of the spent lime shell halves, and I'm going to go with this one to set that in. And then, to begin with, he used a sprig of mint, which we've got. Now, there's a couple ways that you can do this. I've seen where people have tapped it around the edge of the glass to express those oils. Another way that you can do it, in the hand and just give it a nice pat. And you're going to put that in behind that lime shell there. And then we're going to put our straw in behind that. So now, with the garnish, what you have is you have your tropical island with the tree in the back, made out of the sprig of mint. And here we've built our Mai Tai. So here it is, Trader Vic's 1944 Mai Tai, similar to what you could still get today at any Trader Vic's location. So as you can see, we've got the lime shell in there, which is our island, and we've got our garnish of the mint. Now, one of the things that is important for us to keep in mind in regards to tiki drinks, these are things that they're not complicated per se, but the measurements are the way that they are for a reason. All right, so if you go and try to order this someplace and they're just throwing random fruit juices in and dumping rum in and they're not measuring, that's not a real Mai Tai. That's, I mean, just come on, man. You're totally farbing that up, which is fine. It might still end up tasting good, but it's not a Mai Tai. So one of the things is if you start messing with those proportions, you end up with a much different flavored drink. Now, as we saw, I built this using that Jamaican rum. If you were using that Bacardi Gold rum, it's not going to be as full of an experience as what you're going to get with this, but it's still going to be a tasty drink. It is important that you use just half an ounce of that lime juice instead of 3/4 of an ounce. Because that balances that down enough for that to be a well-rounded tiki beverage for you, okay? I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do that with those ingredients that absolutely everybody should be able to get in case you couldn't get something like what I've got here. That way, no matter where you are on the spectrum of what you can get, you're going to have an enjoyable Mai Tai drink tonight. So just something to keep in mind. When it comes to tiki, those proportions are there for a reason. So we're just going to stick with those. So also, along with this, the garnish is a part of that experience that helps that drink taste the way that it does. So if you drink this without smelling that mint, it's going to actually taste a little bit different. Drink it smelling the mint, and you're going to have a slightly different experience. So I've got the mint. I can smell the lime as well, too. Take a sip here and try to describe it for you. Yeah, I'm getting the mint. The Appleton Estate is coming through. Got a little bit of sweetness coming in from both the orgeat as well as the rock candy simple syrup. It's a pretty refreshing drink. It's somewhat lime forward, but it's also spirit forward as well. It's pretty well balanced to the way that it is here. So thank you for joining me tonight, where maybe you too could enjoy just a little escape that the Mai Tai and the world of tiki has to offer. And if you'd like to learn more about some of the cocktails like the Mai Tai, that are from and more of the history about tiki, I highly recommend you to check out the book Smuggler's Cove by Martin and Rebecca Kate. It's an amazing book. I also need to thank my friend Kelly, who actually helped sponsor the history aspect of not just tonight's episode, but some additional episodes that we've got coming down the pike for you as well. I hope that you were able to enjoy this with friends tonight, whether historic tipplers or not, and would encourage you to do so if possible, because, as I said last time, it's always better when we can history together. So, I'm Leif Halverson, and I look forward to the next time we can enjoy Drinking Through History. Think of that entire chunk that takes place at Novello's between Danny Kaye, Bing Crosby, Bing Cherry? No, I think not.